Hello and welcome to the NMTC Coalition virtual briefing. I'm Ariane Parks and I serve as the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Raposa Associates. Before we begin today though, I would like to take care of some housekeeping for everyone. The slide that you see here goes through the control panel for attendees. The console on the right side of your screen includes several options. There's an audio, you can choose either computer or phone option. You can raise your hands if you want me to message with you. But most importantly, you can submit questions. We are planning to answer questions at the end of each of the sessions. And you can type in your question though at any point, and we'll be going through the queue. And if it's for a different panel, please make sure that you indicate who the question is for if it's a little bit later and you think of something that you want to go back and ask. So now I would like to introduce the New Markets Tax Credit Coalition President, Yvette Etu. She is also the President of Cleveland Development Advisors. Yvette?
Thank you, Ariane. And thank you all for joining us for our first ever virtual New Markets Tax Credit Conference briefing. I expect we'll have a lot of firsts in this unprecedented time. It is also my first event as president for the New Markets Tax Credit Coalition. I'd like to begin by taking a moment to thank our very generous sponsors of this briefing: Applegate and Thorne Thompson, Denton's, Holland and Knight, Nelson and Nelson, Stenton Leonard Street LLP. Thank you all so much for sponsoring this briefing. I am honored and humbled to have the opportunity as president of the coalition and as president of Cleveland Development Advisors, a CDE serving Cleveland, Ohio, to serve during what promises to be a challenging time, but also a time when we as community development experts can make a real, tangible difference in distressed, underserved communities. Places where high unemployment and poverty rates, as well as the struggle for investment, predated the pandemic. Places that are feeling the especially harsh impact of the coronavirus and systemic racial injustice. As New Markets Tax Credit practitioners, we have the ability to drive resources to communities where it's most needed. And I would challenge each of you to view your work through this lens. As you know, this is an important time for the New Markets Tax Credit community. In December, Congress provided a one-year extension at $5 billion allocation. This December, that authorization will expire without legislative action, leaving the low-income communities that we serve without this essential tool for economic revitalization. We currently have House and Senate bills that expand and make New Markets Tax Credit permanent, which have record levels of bipartisan support. In addition, there's an infrastructure bill that proposes to make New Markets Tax Credit permanent and provide additional allocation for communities impacted by COVID-19. But we'll hear more about that from our legislative panel. Before that, we'll hear from Paul Anderson of the coalition on the coalition's 2020 New Markets Tax Credit Progress Report. This report documents New Markets Tax Credit investments, impacts, and trends from calendar year 2019. It is also the 20th anniversary of the New Markets Tax Credit this year. To mark that occasion, the coalition included a great section highlighting the history of the credit, how it came to be, and what's been achieved. In reading this report, I was reminded of my own community's history with New Markets Tax Credit Program, how excited we were to receive our first allocation award in 2003, how thrilled we were to make our first investment in a project called Arbor Park Place, which was the rehabilitation of a vacant shopping center. This project resulted in the first grocery store in the central neighborhood of Cleveland in over 30 years. I am so proud of my community for its prudent and effective use of the New Markets Tax Credit Program. And I'm also so proud of all of you for the work that's done in the New Markets Tax Credit industry. We all play an important role and we must all tell our community's stories. We as a coalition could not produce this great work that Paul is about to talk about without the responses from the CDEs. So thank you all for submitting the information for this important report and advocacy resource. I also want to take the time to thank our sponsors of this report. We received record support this year for this year's edition. If you just indulge me for a moment, I'd love to recognize the following sponsors of the report. NDC, Cohen Resnick, CRF, Hampton Roads Ventures, TD Community Development Corporation, MoFi, UACD, CEI Capital Management, Iowa Business Growth, Greenline Ventures, MMCDC, Central State CDE, Travoy, Capital One, Clearinghouse CDFI, Dudley Ventures, TeleQ, Stenson Leonard Street LLP, Nelson & Nelson, Lathrop Engage, Hush Blackwell, Pierce Atwood, Leverage Law Group, Holland & Knight, Applegate Thorne Thompson, Denton, PNC, and Chase. Thank you all so much for your support. Now I'd like to turn it over to Paul to present his findings and highlights from the 2020 New Markets Tax Credit Progress Report.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for what I hope will be an informative and engaging webinar. My name is Paul Anderson. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at Raposa Associates, and I'm excited to present you with some of the findings of two new reports that we released today. The first is the New Markets Coalition's 2020 Progress Report, our annual report of projects and investments from the previous calendar year. The second is a special report to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the New Markets Tax Credit Program. But first, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors listed here. The work of the New Markets Tax Credit Coalition is only possible with your generous support. Where does our data come from? For New Markets transactions, we use data from a FOIA of the CDFI Fund that included information on over 10,000 transactions. Each year, we survey CDEs on the previous year's New Markets Tax Credit investments. This year, 68 CDEs participated and gave us data on their loans and investments that spanned 47 states. I really want to thank everyone who participated in the survey. I think we made it a little easier this year, but it still takes a lot of your time, and we really appreciate it. Another data set we use is our proprietary data set of extensive research that we have compiled over the years on every New Markets project. That data set represents hundreds of hours of combing through projects, cataloging their impact, and saving that data. We also use CRA reporting data from the Comptroller of Currency. And finally, we took a look at historic tax credit data from the Park Service, rural development data from USDA, over 100 documents from the Clinton and Bush presidential archives, including emails and notes from meetings. And that was mostly used in our 20th anniversary report. We also took a look at census data. We combed through dozens of annual reports from nonprofit service providers that are Qualic Bs, businesses financed through the credit, and much more, including data from LoopNet, which is a real estate website which we use to confirm square footage for real estate projects. So let's take a look at the top-line impacts of New Markets in 2019. The program helped make 288 projects possible in 2019, and those projects created 35,000 permanent full-time jobs, those are direct jobs, and nearly 22,000 direct construction jobs, those are temporary over the course of 12 months. Roughly $2.7 billion in allocation generated about $4.5 billion in total project investment. And keep in mind that that $2.7 billion in allocation only costs the federal government roughly $600 million. The New Markets Tax Credit continues to be a big player in the rehabilitation and construction of real estate in highly distressed areas, and nearly half of the real estate that was constructed or rehabbed was for manufacturing. Of the 1.7 million people served by New Markets community facilities, about 1.1 million are patients in healthcare facilities, and roughly 200,000 children were served by projects that support youth, including daycare facilities. New Markets projects served 232 manufacturing businesses, and that's through new facilities, business incubators, and that ranges from huge manufacturer with over 1,000 jobs to just a small craft manufacturer of jewelry. All told, Those projects created 11,000 manufacturing jobs. Finally, 26% of New Markets financing went to non-metro communities, and another 5% went to rural areas in metropolitan counties. There's certainly no doubt that the New Markets tax credit served rural communities well in 2019. As we've done in the past, we drilled down on every project to figure out all the components, including all the service providers embedded in these projects. And for many of them, there are multiple, particularly the nonprofit and social hubs that have sometimes 15 nonprofits in them. All told, we were able to identify 300 nonprofits, health centers, childcare centers, vocational training programs, libraries, community centers, and all kinds of other things that really make life better for people in low-income communities. The 62 healthcare facilities included 26 federally qualified health centers. One example is the Hill Country Health and Wellness Center, and that's a federally qualified health center in Shasta County, California. That project was made possible through New Markets financing from Nonprofit Finance Fund and the Corporation for Supportive Housing. There were 16 multi-purpose nonprofit and social service hubs in 2019. One example, U.S. Bank Community Development Corporation financed the renovation of a building to house community and office space for nonprofit partners, along with a new community food center, and that's in Denton, Texas. The 29 projects directly benefiting youth and children include almost 10 Boys and Girls Clubs. Among them, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Augusta renovated and expanded their Hagler facility and constructed a new facility in South Augusta, Georgia. That project received New Markets financing from Dudley Ventures and Carver Financial Corporation. Another popular use of New Markets in 2019 was to finance workforce development, employment training, and other adult education programs. For example, in Gary, Indiana, Goodwill used the New Markets to finance a new campus. That financing was from Southside Community Optical Redevelopment Enterprise. And along with the typical Goodwill retail store, the campus also provides programming called Grow with Google. And that's a program that Google has been doing across the country, allowing individuals to get basic skills and training for computers and IT certifications for special support positions. Down the road from Gary in Fort Worth, Indiana, New Markets financed the new Fort Worth Rescue Mission. That's a nonprofit organization providing restorative care to men, women, and children experiencing homelessness. New Markets financing from the city of Fort Worth allowed the mission to relocate and construct a new 80,000 square foot facility, and that will let them expand services and provide desperately needed resources for the most vulnerable population in that community. The project nearly triples available beds to 325 beds. It also includes a community resource center for immediate needs and agency referrals, a health clinic, and a recuperative care center. That's another example of a project that has multiple social service components. And finally, among the 23 museums, theaters, and cultural programs financed by New Markets in 2019 was the Los Angeles Philharmonic Youth Orchestra, or YOLA. And that's a great youth music program in Los Angeles. And the New Markets financing from Genesis LA and Raza Development Fund was used to transform an existing 18,000 square foot commercial building into the new music education facility and community center. This year's progress report also highlights projects that benefit Indian country and tribes and native communities. We go through some investor trends. The price of the credit went down a little bit this year. We also go through project selection and how CDEs find projects and where they source them. So contained within this year's progress report is a very special report that we did on the 20th anniversary of the program. As you know, the program was enacted in 2000, and this December we'll be hitting that 20th anniversary. So we've done a deep dive into past projects using some FOIA data and as well as the CDFI Fund data and all the data we've collected over the years. And we also looked at some of the Clinton and Bush administration archives to get some information about what was going through policymakers' minds when they were coming up with this program and implementing it. The 20th anniversary report includes a pretty lengthy section on the origins of the program, where, like I said, we looked at Clinton administration library documents, and there was a lot of interesting stuff in there. If you haven't looked through digital archives of presidency, I recommend it. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there, just notes that people are taking and decision-making process, sometimes kind of amusing, actually. At any rate, we traced the New Markets program back to the 80s and 90s when the federal government started leaning on the tax code to do community development instead of the traditional grants and loan programs that they had used. We also talk about the CDC tax credit pilot program, which was very important, and that was one of the impetuses for the program. Another one was really Bill Clinton's interest in doing something big on community development, soften the impact of welfare reform and the work requirements that were passed in 1996. And also because, despite all the prosperity of the 1990s, investment simply was not reaching a lot of geographical areas. This is still a problem we struggle with today, and New Markets has been one of the most successful approaches in getting private sector financing to communities that have been historically underserved. The report also has some information about the poverty tour, the legislation that was initially introduced, as well as enactment. And we also go into the implementation and some of the early projects. Using the data sources I mentioned earlier, we took a look at every single project and quantified their impact. And where we did not have direct data, we were able to find a lot of backup sources. For example, the number of patients served and the number of square feet in a lot of buildings. The New Markets Coalition has done a macroeconomic analysis of the jobs created by the program, and that includes direct, indirect, and induced jobs. But for the purposes of this, we just looked at direct jobs. We found that there were almost 500,000 full-time equivalent and 544,000 construction jobs. The total capital mobilized by the program is roughly $105 billion at this point, and that's through 6,400 projects, which range from $1,000 loan to a daycare provider to a huge redevelopment project in Baltimore that totaled $1 billion in project costs. I'll highlight a few things here. You can see the breadth of the program's impact in terms of supporting vulnerable populations and supporting existing residents of low-income communities. New Markets is quite simply one of the most important sources of capital for healthcare providers in low-income communities in areas that are difficult to serve. It's financed over 1,000 in the course of the program. And again, that number comes from looking at every single project and digging through multi-component projects and finding all the health centers and health clinics and hospitals and ERs and other programs. We identified over 1,000 components of projects that serve children and youth, including 400 schools, 600 childcare and youth programs, and both Boys and Girls Clubs and YMCAs and YWCAs are a very popular use of New Markets. We identified 250 recreational facilities serving low-income areas. The New Markets program has changed quite a bit over the years, and some of the factors that are pushing the change are higher competition, higher familiarity with the program, a variety of tweaks to the application and reporting requirements by the CDFI Fund, and also the overall trends in the economy in terms of what communities actually need. The most notable trend here is a move away from the retail and the service sector and a move away from general purpose real estate towards industrial projects, and that includes manufacturing, timber, and wholesale businesses, along with ports and other industrial facilities. Also, community facilities have increased as a share of the program, and that's been led mostly by healthcare. Drilling down a bit, looking at for-profit projects, so for example, business financing or commercial real estate, the trend here is also towards manufacturing. There's been a slight increase in groceries and food financing, probably due to the emphasis by the Obama administration in their early years. Pure mixed-use facilities that don't include a community facility component have fallen as a share of projects, as has general-purpose real estate for offices. And energy projects trended for a few years as the Bush administration and then later the Obama administration instituted some new credits for renewable energy projects. Digging into community facilities a bit more, in the wake of Hurricane Katrina and some other disasters, affordable housing became a more popular use of the program that has declined a bit recently. Projects that directly benefited a church or some other faith-based nonprofit have declined a bit since the Bush years, when you might intuit that Bush's faith-based initiative drove some spending in the social sector towards those kind of projects. And youth and daycare programs, along with emergency shelters and programs for very vulnerable populations, have increased as a share of the program recently. Early on in the program, very few projects were in rural areas, and there was some concern on whether that would be the case. I think outside of USDA, people associated community development mostly with HUD and urban areas. Ensure that non-metro areas got their fair share of allocation. In 2004, legislation was passed that would require Treasury to take a look at the proportional share of allocation and make sure that enough goes to non-metro areas, and that's been the case over the years. It's been a fairly successful effort. And it's worth noting that our next panel includes Nick Wyatt, and he works for Senator Grassley, who was one of the instigators of that effort. Some other trends that I found kind of interesting. There's an impression that the program has moved away from central business districts as the program has matured. So I took a look at how many projects were within 1 mile of a central business district and compared that over time and found that around 12% were within 1 mile of a central business district, whereas 6% were in the later years. This is not a surprising trend because central business districts have generally experienced economic growth over the last couple decades, and there's higher poverty outside of them in the inner suburbs and some of the peripheries of cities. For example, in Chicago, pictured here, South Side. The program also continues to reach more areas of the country. The CDFI Fund gives a slight preference to CDEs that are going to finance projects in states that have been underserved by the program. They have a list of 10 states each year. And Nebraska is a good example of one that had almost nothing in terms of investment in the first few years, then saw hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in recent years. We also did a deep dive on historic rehabilitation and renovation. And early on in the program, nearly half of projects involve historic rehabilitation. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that these are historic tax credit projects or even that they met the Secretary of Interior's standards for historic rehabilitation, but all these projects that we identified involved historic rehab of some kind. So an historic building was vacant or underutilized, and New Markets put it back to use, put it back on the tax rolls, brought it back to life. The report also highlights supplementary rounds of New Markets, for example, for the GO Zone and for the Great Recession. And I mention that because over the years, this program has been great as an economic stabilizer for communities that have experienced a precipitous decline in their economic fortunes, whether that's through natural disaster or an economic catastrophe. This program has a 20-year track record of promoting revitalization, and it's doing it in the most distressed communities in the country. So we hope policymakers will take a good look at this program as they craft measures to promote economic recovery in the wake of this terrible pandemic that we're going through right now.
Hi, folks. This is Bob Raposa. I just wanted to fill everyone in on where things stand at this moment with regard to the credit. As you know, and as Yvette said, Congress passed an extension of the credit through the end of this year at $5 billion in credit authority. That round is not yet out, and the CDFI Fund is completing action on the 2019 round, and we will hear from the fund this afternoon, which we hope will be an update on when those allocations will come out. As we have in the past years, we are working on an extension campaign. We have two bills, a House and Senate bill, that are identical. S-750 is the Senate bill, H.R. 1680 is the House bill. Both provide $5 billion in annual credit authority, a permanent extension of the credit, as well as an exception from the AMT. Last week, we released a letter to Congress signed by over 700 organizations, and thanks to all of you that helped with that, to support the extension legislation, as well as to add an additional $3.5 billion that would be phased in over 3 years to help with the economic recovery, and some temporary provisions to increase investor liquidity. Some of those provisions are included in H.R. 2, which is the infrastructure bill, which the House is considering at this time. Congress has done a good bit with the response to the health and the economic consequences of the pandemic. It has already spent roughly $3 trillion on bills to support the economy and support households. In May, the House passed the HEROES Act, which added over $3 trillion in additional funding for both health and for economic recovery. As I said, the House is considering the infrastructure bill as we speak. We expect Congress to take further action with regard to a COVID-19 response bill by the end of July. And part of the question that part of our campaign, sending the letter to the Hill, was to get on the radar screen of the House and the Senate, including some provisions that relate to NMTC. The extender legislation, the add-ons that we had proposed to promote the economic recovery, as well as some temporary changes to current tax law to improve the liquidity of investors. So thank you very much. And Jodi Harris is right there. Hi, Jodi. Thanks for joining us. I was thinking this morning that in the 20 years or so of the coalition, we have had a great partnership with the CDFI Fund and with all the directors of the CDFI Fund, of which I believe you are the 8th that we've worked with. So thank you, Jodi. So we are going to hear from Jodi. Maybe she'll have some news on the 2019 round. There's some interest in that, I'm guessing, and then after she talks for a bit, she's going to introduce her colleagues at the CDFI Fund. So Jodi, thank you very much. It's great to see you, and the floor is yours. Thanks again. I think you've got to get your mic.
Okay, I think that works now. Thanks, Bob, for that. And thank you, everyone, for having me again join the coalition meeting this year. A very interesting time that we're in, learning all types of technology I didn't know existed, but I hope that this message and this conversation finds everyone well and safe, working remotely or in the office or wherever you may be. I want to just start off by acknowledging the NMTC Coalition's, I guess, proactiveness during this time. I'm not sure if everyone on the call is aware, but we have heard from Bob and from others sharing the concerns, sharing the questions, sharing the solutions to how CDFIs and CDEs can participate in the rebuild and recovery process that we're definitely going to need to head into to get out of this COVID-19 situation that we're in. And so we've gotten the letters. The coalition has been very thorough in raising issues to us as it relates to deployment of funds, deployment of allocations in the wake of this new economy. And so I just want to let everyone know that we are reading everything. We're taking everything into account. We don't have immediate answers because we're trying to look at this across all of our programs, including compliance, including IT. We don't want to make any kind of rash or hasty decisions that we then have to kind of backtrack or do later on. So we're trying to look at this across the board. So if we make changes to certain requirements in one program, how does that impact others? So know that you may not receive a lot of emails from us as we're going through this, but I want everyone to know that we are working on it. And I thank Bob and the other members of the coalition for continually give us feedback. We appreciate that, and we do like to hear from you. Especially remotely, you all are one of the ways that we actually understand what's happening in our community. So thank you for that. I'll talk a little bit about some of the initiatives we have going on now, and I'll give a brief program update. But as Bob mentioned, we have a good panel of CDFI Fund folks who will get down into the details of our program compliance and data. We have Christopher Allison, who's our New Markets Program Manager. We have Tanya McGinnis, who's our Compliance Manager, and we have Greg Bishop, who's our Financial Services Strategies and Research Manager. But before we go to the panel, I do want to talk about the certification process. So while the certification process doesn't necessarily impact CDEs, it does impact CDFIs who have CDEs. And in early May, we issued a request for public comment. We extended this out 90 days. I know now is not the ideal time to ask people to kind of drop what they're doing and pay attention to what is a lengthy document, but we would really love to hear you. And so we've extended the deadline for comments to August 5th, which is a little longer than normal, but I do hope that you all and through the coalition can take a look at it and provide us any feedback. This certification application, along with our annual certification report and a new report we're introducing called the CTLR, will help us shore up our certification policies and procedures. It'll help us put more teeth behind our certification requirements in terms of ensuring that folks that have a primary mission of community and economic development are actually doing things that reflect a mission of community and economic development. With our data collection, we want to continue to think about how to minimize burden, but we also want to bring in new data points that allow us to paint a broad picture or a more holistic picture of the CDFI industry in general. And we are also thinking about ways that we can make that data available at a future state so that you all can use it to support your initiatives and your activities. So a couple things to highlight in certification for you all to kind of pay attention to. One is the primary mission test. Take a look at that, make sure the questions that we're asking are the right questions. Take a look at our target market. We're eliminating the geographic restrictions. There'll be very few cases where folks will still need to draw a map, but in general, if you are doing eligible activity in a qualifying area, it will be able to qualify toward your target market. We're also looking at accountability to make it more efficient or easier in a way to demonstrate that accountability, especially if we're eliminating geographic boundaries. We want to make sure that you all are able to obtain folks in your governing or advisory board that can reflect the wide range, or even if it's a narrow area, but can more accurately reflect accountability to that target market. And as you've heard me say before, and probably have heard others, you know, the reason for this isn't to make it more difficult to be certified. It is to make it so that our certification brand, being a CDFI, means something. It means a great deal now, but we want to make sure that we are holding institutions to what they say that they are doing. There will be a phase-in process. The way this works is that we collect comments, we go through everything, we then have to share those comments with OMB, they go through everything, and then we finalize the application, and we will then use that to certify institutions. However, those who are already certified, we will have a process for ensuring that all of those institutions then meet the new certification standards. So this won't be a wrap up the application, put it in place, and we're done. This will be a process. And so we'll definitely go into the next fiscal year in terms of implementing this. The other thing I'll touch on briefly are the program. I know the program you want to hear about is New Markets, and so I'll let Christopher talk about those details. But for those of you who also engage with the other programs, or you engage with CDFIs who participate in those programs, you know, working remotely, I have to say the whole team has really been able to do a great amount of work. We had a few hiccups in the beginning, but we are still moving along with all of our programs. And right now, every single program is in some stage of the application and award process. With our CDFI program, we will be announcing the financial assistance and the technical assistance awards this year at the same time. Last year, we separated the FA and TA in order to accommodate for the 5-week government closure. But this year, we're on track to announce both of those awards, including the NACA program awards, by the fiscal year end. So we're excited to be able to get back on schedule with that. We are also going to announce the Bank Enterprise Award Program by this fiscal year end. And so that's on track as well. Capital Magnet Fund is in the application stage. The SF 424s were due already, and now it's time to submit the application that's due on July 27th. But even just from the initial look at our SF 424s, we've got a lot of interest more so than last year. And we also have a lot more funding. So hopefully some groups listening in did apply for that. We have $175 million this year to award. Our bond guarantee program, it is also in the application phase. We had $500 million in authority this year, and we are reviewing applications that we received. And so we're on track to also announce the bond guarantee program recipients by the end of the fiscal year. And for new markets, I'll leave it to Christopher, like I said, to kind of talk through some of those details. Sorry, Bob. I'm going to let Christopher talk about the rounds and 2019. So you have to wait maybe 2 minutes more. The other thing I just want to mention is, you know, this time has been challenging for a number of reasons. And we are still moving through our program. You may see a lot coming out from us in the next couple months. We have, like I said, this certification PRA notice on the application. We put out something about the equity investment policy. For those of you who've gotten equity investments through the financial assistance program, you'll recognize that, and we asked to comment on that. We have a new program coming online, so we're going to put out an RFI asking for that. And then we also recently sent out a notification about material events. And this was sent out just to ensure that folks are letting us know of any changes in the organization, any changes in key people. One good thing about what's happening, if you can look at a bright side, is that CDFIs and the CDFI Fund have been in more conversations in the last few months than I think they've been in from the administrative side and from Congress the whole time in my tenure. So while what we're talking about is difficult and painful at times, it is nice that the CDFI Fund is coming up in those conversations. And so often we're asked information on CDFIs, which CDFIs do small business lending, which CDFIs do commercial real estate. And we have to look at who's in our system as far as contacts and recent information. So we just sent out that material events reminder to just kind of give a nudge to keep your information up to date and let us know of any activity that you may be doing with other institutions that just may change some of the key aspects of your organization. So I will stop there and turn it over to Christopher Allison, who's the New Markets Program Manager, Tanya McGinnis, who's our Compliance Manager, and Greg Bishak, who's our Financial Strategies and Research Manager. And then after that, I believe we will take some questions. So thank you for your time and look forward to any questions you have.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Christopher Allison, and I'm the Program Manager for the New Markets Tax Credit Program and the Bank Enterprise Award Program. So I'll start off with 2019 because I know that's what you were all dying to hear about. As you all know, the application was due on October 28th of last year. The CDFI Fund received 206 applications requesting $14.7 billion in allocation. Congress authorized $3.5 billion to award this round. So for the past few months, we have been reviewing applications as part of our phase 2 process and have been working to finalize those decisions. Based on our current timeline, I anticipate that we will be able to announce the calendar year 2019 allocation awards by the end of July. I know that there is a lot of anticipation. So my update is that we are on track to meet our goal of a midsummer announcement. Next, I am going to move on to the 2020 round. So Congress authorized $5 billion in allocation authority for calendar year 2020. We plan to open the next round late summer or early fall of this year. I'm often asked what the additional allocation authority means for the number of awards the CDFI Fund will make. While no decision has been made, I think it's reasonable to look at past allocation rounds where $5 billion in tax credit authority was available. For example, around 100 NMTC awards were made in the 2008 and 2009 rounds as a result of additional tax credit authority authorized by the Recovery Act. At the same time, it depends on the quality of applications we receive. In the end, the CDFI Fund will take into account the number of highly qualified applications and each applicant's ability to manage and deploy an allocation. So the final thing I want to give you an update on, we are anticipating releasing a request for public comment on the allocation application. So that will be published in the Federal Register. We're planning to do that in the fall of 2020. So, and this is required by the Paperwork Reduction Act. So as part of this process, the public will have 60 days to provide comments on the allocation application, its contents, and the burden associated with completing it. If you remember, the last time we did this was in 2017, and those changes were implemented in the 2018 allocation application. So I encourage you to respond once it's published in the Federal Register. And also I want to make clear that we plan to publish this notice after the 2020 allocation application is due. So there's not really going to be an overlap. We'll open the next round. Once the applications are due, we'll then go out for public comment on the allocation application. And as a result of those public comments we receive, those changes won't be implemented until the calendar year 2021 round at the earliest. And I'll just say that the best way to stay up to date on these types of notices is to sign up for GovDelivery email updates on the CDFI Fund website. So that's all I have for right now. I'm going to turn it over to Tanya McGinnis.
Thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Bob. It's always a pleasure to be a part of this conference. So we appreciate the opportunity to present to the group. Few updates to share with you all. One is that we are continuing to reconcile the TLR data in AMIS, and you're probably receiving calls and or emails from my staff asking for information just to make sure the information we have in our system is accurate. So thank you for working with my staff to get the information in the system and making sure it is accurate. We're also going to make some updates to the allocation QEI tracking user guide based on some comments we received, just to clarify the guidance in that document. So we plan to complete that effort in August of this year. Also, what we plan to issue in August is the New Markets Compliance FAQs. So stay tuned for that. Please let us know if there are any specific topics you would like for us to address in the FAQs or we need to clarify. And if you do have any topics, please submit a service request. By submitting a service request, it helps us to track the topics and help us to identify any trends that we need to be aware of. So again, FAQs, we're working on updating that document and plan to publish it in August. And a general reminder, and I normally state this up front whenever I speak at an event, is to please know the terms and conditions of your allocation agreement. And if you have several allocations, know the terms and conditions of each allocation. Just want to make sure you are aware of your compliance and your reporting obligations. Jodi spoke about a notification we sent a few weeks ago regarding material events. And again, we just want to, we need to make sure we had your current information in our system. And so that notification is part of a larger effort in which we will be sending out periodic reminders to organizations, reminding them of their reporting obligations. And lastly, I want to encourage you all to proactively reach out to us, and I know a number of you all have, and let us know, what you're experiencing, what you're dealing with in your communities, in your geographies. We're definitely in uncharted territory right now. And so we want to work in partnership with you Again, we know that the environment is challenging, and we want to work together to make sure we're being responsive to the needs and that we're working together to get through this, and I know we will. Okay, that's it for my comments, so I'm going to turn everything over to Greg.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you to the New Markets Tax Credit Coalition for convening this event. It's always a pleasure to be able to discuss and present with key elements of the sector. And so today I'm really going to give you an update on the New Markets Tax Credit Program reporting and some changes that are pending. But before I do that, I know that today is June 30th and that many CDEs have reporting due today. If for one reason or another you're having problems with submission or anything else, including to what Tanya just alluded to, the situation in your communities and your organization, please use the service request to submit any comments and requests for assistance in your reporting, especially if you're having problems, and this will be important to both compliance and to the reporting units to be able to evaluate. So with that reminder, let me just turn to things that are occurring right now. This February, we issued a request for public comment on the New Markets Tax Credit Transactional Level Report and Institution Level Report. And this was principally to look at the changes in the data system from CIS to AMOS. We requested public comments. They were due April 27th. It is now in the court of OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to review and to issue their 30 days in response and collect comments. Those who did respond to our request, we want to thank you. We'll note that this was a pretty plain vanilla request for public comment. It was necessary to maintain our data collection under the Paperwork Reduction Act and to renew it with the Office of Management and Budget. Because of the timeline, we did not include any new data points, which I know many in the industry were looking forward to seeing regarding changes in the Qualic B disclosure, changes in data elements on fees and expenses in the transaction level report, new data points to measure the depth of public subsidy, and also outcome data points. For this, we're issuing another request for public comments fast on the heels of that one, which will include the new data points. Sorry about the duplication of effort to some extent, but it was necessary to maintain the our ability to collect this data. And as you know, this data is very important. You saw Paul Anderson's presentation before. Much of the data is used by him and others, researchers, and as well, it plays well on Capitol Hill to be able to explain where and what is being invested into the New Markets Tax Credit. So these data points that we're going out for are very important for a variety of reasons. And on top of that, we also need to be able to address the recommendations of the General Accountability Office, and these will be forthcoming. We aim to get these out before this fiscal year is out. Indeed, before the summer is out, I aim to get that through the whole clearance process, but not everything is easily managed within the clearance process, but I think we'll get it done. So please look for those. We'll expect copious comments on those new data points, but we tried to keep the burden to a minimum. We really were very focused on minimizing the burden to the industry and collecting only improvements in the data that we needed to be able to implement these changes, as well as to meet needs that the sector, the industry itself had raised about outcome reporting. You folks have had many numerous comments in the past, and we're trying to address those. With that, let me turn quickly to updates about what the new transactional level report reporting will be in September 2020 when we open the next round of reporting. We've listened carefully to a lot of your comments, and what we've done is One, improve the upload and data correction functionality for the transactional level report. Really did hear your comments on that, and we're also aiming to do an automatic syncing of multi-CDE data with individual project data. Yet another thing we heard the feedback from. Further, we've enabled the upload of loan source and disbursement data, another request from the industry. Further, we've enhanced the address reporting, and they'll be verified using the Esri service in Amos, and it'll allow us to improve that process and streamline it a bit for you. Further, we're allowing users to be able to view and download uploaded reports. This is, again, something that the industry has requested, and we're implementing in this next iteration of the transactional level reporting. And further, we're providing help text updates to make it more intelligible to the user. I'm afraid some things were lost in translation in the first iteration, but I think we've done better in this iteration. And I guess the final thing that we've enhanced about reporting is we're providing the ability to submit and certify interim transactional level report data prior to the final annual reporting submission deadline. This allows users and CDEs to be able to upload and complete reports on transactions before the final deadline. This will make the burden easier to manage over time as you close transactions. And this also supports the application process. I know many who are multiple allocatees know that during the application round, you're often asked to provide more recent transactional data. This provides the facility within the transactional reporting process to do something in real time. So in short, we've listened to you carefully, and we've sought to enhance the current data collection, and with the respect to anticipated new data points, we've sought to minimize the burden on the industry. With that, I'll turn it back to our moderators and look forward to any questions. Thank you.
All right, this is Ariane. I want to thank all of you for your presentations, and I'm going to open it up for questions here. We've got one so far. Folks, feel free to type them in, and we will get to as many as we can. Looks like we have some time for a few questions. CDFIs were able to be PPP lenders under the CARES Act. Is CDFI Fund willing to partner with SBA to make the new certification sufficient to certify CDFIs as SBA lenders for other community development products?
Thanks for the question. That's an interesting one. I'd want to understand more of the kind of genesis behind the request. So right now, our certification is based off of statute, and it is mainly to certify institutions to participate in our programs, although many agencies like SBA use CDFI certification as a criterion in their programs. And so I'd want to understand a little bit more about what is needed there. We do work with SBA when it pertains to community advantage and some of the 7A requirements, and even with the latest PPP program, there was some consultation. But I would ask the person that asked the question to kind of shoot me an email, and we can set up a call because I'd want to understand more. I think it's a really interesting point.
Thank you very much. So I don't have any more questions in the queue right now. Let me just make sure. Oh, there's another one. I would ask if the new CDFI certification would allow CDFIs the full 7A license.
So the 7A program is administered through SBA, and they set their own requirements. There's legislation and regulation that dictate how that program is structured. Our certification focuses mainly on the mission and activities of financial institutions to serve specific communities. and they're mission focused. And so insofar as the financial institution to be able to qualify under the 7A program, I think that's a separate activity, and they are in some ways mutually exclusive. If you can qualify for 7A, you should pursue that. If you then want to be a CDFI that participates in the 7A program, then you would pursue CDFI certification. We don't look at your record as a 7A lender to determine that. So again, I don't know if it's the same person with the questions about SBA, but I would love to have a conversation about what the interplay is between becoming an SBA lender and the CDFI certification, where you can do both, or you can do one, or you can do the other. And so whatever objective you're trying to achieve there, be happy to talk through how that could work.
So they were two separate people. To follow up though on that most recent question, well, it says CDFIs can use a USDA BNI license, but not the SBA 7A program. All three agencies should work together as they are good tools. More of a comment than a question. Yeah, and I appreciate that. For the 7A program, you have to be a regulated financial institution. You have to be a bank. And so if you are not a regulated financial institution, I think by statute, or at least by regulation, you don't qualify under 7A. Now, 7A had the Community Advantage program, which allowed non-bank and credit unions to participate in the 7A program. And we had been talking with them about kind of lifting the cap on the number of CDFIs that they're participating. I guess they had more of a moratorium of certifying those groups. And so there is precedent for using CDFI certification as a way to get access to those programs. But I wholeheartedly agree that the agencies should work together. And this is something, you know, we have our Community Development Advisory Board where we have SBA represented, as well as Indian Affairs. And so that's definitely something that we can look into. Thanks for the comment. Great, thank you. All right, do we have any other questions? I'll give folks just a second to type them in if they do. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and thank our panel. We just one more second. All right, I have a question that we had earlier that I kind of wanted to see what you all thought about, that someone had asked. So what are you all thinking about in terms of, you know, the new virtual world of COVID-19, technology advances and impacts on project choices moving forward? Do you anticipate seeing, you know, different types of projects?
Well, I definitely think, oh, Christopher, did you want to go ahead?
No, go.
Okay.
I can go after you.
Okay. Well, I definitely think, just from the conversations that I've had recently, that there's a lot of innovation taking place despite all of the challenges and difficulties in ensuring that our communities have the resources that they need. I see, at least for us, the use of technology in making projects happen, or at least facilitating the deals in terms of raising capital or deploying capital. I think there are opportunities there. And it's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to work on our certification, to eliminate some of the geographic boundaries where technology will allow products and services to be delivered farther in different areas, in places where you may not have a physical presence, but you know that there is a need there in that community. So I think we will see different types of projects. As far as the type, in terms of different types of services, there are a lot of businesses, institutions, facilities that have to rework how they work. And so if you are a 20 table restaurant, you might have to go to 10 and they have to be outfitted a certain way. If you're a charter school that had 20 kids in every class, you may have to outfit and refit that institution to accommodate some of the changes taking place. If you are a commercial building with mainly commercial tenants, you may have to restructure the purpose and the use of those buildings to accommodate the way that businesses are changing how they do work. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting innovation come out of this. Christopher, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Jodi just said. I mean, I think inherent in this program and related to the accountability that CDEs have, we are expecting, that CDEs, with allocation, will look to be responsive to the communities that they serve. And so, I mean, I could definitely see some changes there in the way that businesses are operating, in the ways that buildings are constructed and things like that. And there are obviously costs associated with that, right? That could change some of the financing needs of the businesses that we're serving. So, I think we are sort of looking to you all as the folks that are actually making investment decisions to look at those community needs and align with them. I think it'll be interesting to see the innovations that come out of this, again, under very trying circumstances, but hopefully this is a tool that can help address some of those issues.
This is Greg Bishek. I think that a lot of these community capacity investments that are going to be affected by the demand for more IT capabilities, more technologies to enable telemedicine, social assistance, educational services, are going to demand new investment, particularly in areas that have faced marked disparities in the access to IT, broadband, and even the business services necessary to make businesses more capable to meet the needs of their community. Certainly this crisis has underscored the areas of the country that have huge disparities, minority-owned businesses, and other disadvantaged areas. And this program is ideally suited to help stage the next round of investment in the kind of technology enhancement to be able to achieve more equity in these kind of economic development initiatives.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's something that we've heard a lot about in terms of, especially like the broadband, which you brought up, Greg. It's with schools and health centers. It's just really difficult if a community doesn't have good access to the internet to make some of these shifts. So I don't see any other questions here. So I am going to thank everyone and turn it over to Bob Raposa for closing words. Bob?
Thank you, Ariane, and thank you very much to our friends at the CDFI Fund. I want to thank everyone for dialing in today. This was our first attempt at a virtual. It didn't go perfectly, but I hope everyone found that the session to be informative and helpful. I want to thank again our sponsors, NDC, Cone Resnick, CRF, Hampton Roads, TD Community Development Corporation, UACD, Iowa Business Growth, Green Ventures, MMCDC, Central States CDE, Travoy, Capital One, Clearinghouse, Dudley Ventures, Telecu, Stinson, Leonard Street, Lathrop and Gage, Hush Blackwell, Pierce Atwood, Leverage Law, Holland and Knight, Applegate Thorne Thompson, Denton's, PNC, and the MoFi and Nelson. Thanks to all for your help. Thanks for dialing in. We hope to see you in December at the annual conference for the coalition. And if we don't see you, we hope you see us at a virtual conference again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day and a great 4th of July holiday.